A millionaire told his son to pick a new mother from 5 rich women. But in front of everyone, the boy shocked the world. He pointed past the diamonds and gowns, straight to the black housekeeper. What happened next would challenge power, pride, and everything money could buy. The mansion stood like a silent fortress at the edge of the city, its marble columns gleaming under the morning sun. Inside, wealth and luxury seemed to breathe in every corner. The kind of wealth that could buy anything except peace of heart. For James Whitmore, a millionaire known for his empire of real estate and steel, that peace had slipped away years ago when his wife died, leaving him with a son and a home that felt colder than its stone walls. The boy's name was Daniel. At 10 years old, Daniel carried a loneliness far beyond his years. His mother's absence left a hollow space that no toy, no tutor, no gift could fill. James loved his son in the way he knew how, with money, protection, and plans for the future. But he could not give him the warmth that Daniel silently yearned for, the warmth of a mother's embrace. One evening, as James watched his son at the grand dining table, he saw the boy pushing food around his plate with no appetite. "You're not eating," James said, his voice carrying the sharpness of command more than concern. Daniel looked up with tired eyes and asked softly, "Dad, why don't I have a mother like the other kids at school?" The question struck James like a blade. He had avoided it for years, but now the boy's gaze demanded an answer. After a long pause, James made a decision. "Daniel," he said firmly, "it's time we change that. You need a mother again, and I will give you a choice." A few days later, James arranged for 5 women to visit the mansion. They were all wealthy, elegant, and carefully chosen from families of influence. To James, they represented stability, prestige, and a continuation of his legacy. He told Daniel that he could choose among them, the woman who would become his new mother. The boy, wide-eyed and uncertain, listened as the women were introduced one by one, their jewels glittering, their voices polished like glass. But as Daniel sat quietly, his gaze kept drifting away from the women. Instead, his eyes lingered on a figure standing humbly at the side of the room. The housekeeper, Evelyn. She was a black woman in her 40s, dressed in her plain uniform, her hands folded neatly in front of her. Evelyn had been working in the Whitmore household for years, and though her position was modest, her presence carried a quiet strength. To Daniel, she was more than just the woman who kept the house clean. She was the one who listened when no one else did, the one who placed an extra cookie on his plate when he was sad, the one who tucked him in on nights when nightmares haunted him. As the women spoke of wealth, travel, and fashion, Daniel found his heart pulling him in another direction. He did not see warmth in their eyes. He saw only ambition. But when his gaze met Evelyn's, he saw love, silent, steady, and real. James noticed his son's wandering eyes and frowned. He leaned closer and whispered, "Daniel, these women can give you everything you need. Choose wisely. This decision is about your future." Daniel nodded, but his heart felt heavier with every passing moment. When the time came to speak, James turned to his son in front of the 5 women. "Tell me, Daniel, who do you choose to be your new mother?" The room grew still. Daniel's small hands trembled as he looked at the women lined up, their smiles thin and expectant. Then he turned toward the far side of the room, where Evelyn stood in quiet humility. His voice was soft, yet it carried the weight of truth. "I want Evelyn." The air cracked with silence. The women gasped, and James's face turned to stone. For a moment, no one moved. A child's choice had shattered the expectation of wealth, class, and race in that instant. James stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "Daniel," he said, his voice low with disbelief. "She is a housekeeper. Do you understand what you're saying? She is not like us. She cannot stand in the place of your mother." But Daniel's eyes filled with tears as he replied, "She already has. She's the only one who makes me feel like I still have a mom. I don't care about money or fancy clothes, or who people think we should be. I just want her." The room was no longer quiet. It was tense with the weight of truth. Evelyn's hands trembled slightly, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never imagined being thrust into such a moment, never expected that the love she had quietly given would rise to the surface in front of so many eyes. The women, offended, left one by one, their pride wounded. And James, standing stiffly, looked at his son with a storm of emotions: anger, confusion, fear of judgment from society. Yet beneath it all, a small voice of conscience whispered, perhaps the boy was right. That night, as the house grew still, James sat in his study with a glass of whiskey, staring into the fire. Daniel slept peacefully upstairs, comforted by the thought that he had spoken his heart. Evelyn lay awake in her small quarters, torn between duty and the impossible path now laid before her. The mansion itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would come next. For in one child's choice lay the spark of a revolution, not just in a family, but in the very ideas of love, dignity, and what it means to belong. The following morning, the Whitmore mansion felt different. The chandeliers glittered as they always had, the maids moved about quietly, and the grand hall smelled of polished wood and flowers. But beneath the surface, there was tension. Word had spread quickly among the staff about what Daniel had said. Whispers floated in the corridors. The boy chose Evelyn, the housekeeper, in front of the millionaire himself. Evelyn kept her head low as she worked, her hands scrubbing and folding with the same precision as always. But inside, her thoughts raced. She loved Daniel dearly, as if he were her own. But the boy's choice had opened a dangerous door. She had lived her whole life understanding boundaries, knowing where she belonged and where she did not. Now, those lines were blurred. James summoned her to his study. She walked in with steady steps, her uniform freshly pressed, her eyes calm though her heart thundered. He stood by the window, looking out at the gardens where Daniel once played with his mother. "Evelyn," he said without turning, "do you know what my son did yesterday?" "Yes, sir," she replied quietly. James turned then, his face stern but not unkind. "You must understand the gravity of this. Daniel is young, impressionable. He doesn't know what he's asking. You've been good to him. Too good, perhaps. But you and I both know this is impossible. You are an employee here. You clean this house. You cannot be a Whitmore." Evelyn met his eyes, her voice steady. "Sir, I never asked to be chosen. I never tried to take that place. But children see truth more clearly than we do. Daniel doesn't care about who has money or who sits in parlors. He only knows who loves him." James's jaw tightened. He wanted to argue, but her words cut to the bone. For years, he had equated love with security, with status, with preserving a name that echoed through boardrooms and banks. But what did a child care for such things? Daniel's hunger was for affection, not wealth. That evening, James sat down with his son. "Daniel," he began gently, "I know you feel close to Evelyn, but you must understand. Choosing a mother isn't like choosing a favorite meal. Life doesn't work that way." Daniel, small and fragile in his oversized chair, looked back at his father with unwavering eyes. "I know what I want, Dad. You told me I could choose. And I chose her. Why doesn't my choice matter?" The question pierced James's chest. His son had always been quiet, but in this moment he was firm, almost defiant. James could see his late wife's spirit flickering in the boy. The same honesty, the same refusal to bow before appearances. Days passed, but Daniel's decision did not waver. The mansion was caught in a quiet battle between appearances and truth. When James hosted dinners with business associates, he noticed Daniel refusing to smile at the women who came, their perfume thick in the air, their laughter forced. But when Evelyn passed by, Daniel's face lit with ease. One afternoon, James's sister, Margaret, visited, a woman of rigid pride and inherited prejudice. She was furious when she learned of Daniel's choice. "This is unacceptable, James," she declared, her pearls trembling on her neck. "A housekeeper? And a black woman at that? What do you think society will say? Your reputation, your empire, it will be ruined." James listened in silence, but Daniel, who overheard from the staircase, ran down and shouted, "I don't care what society says. She's my mom." His voice shook with tears, but his conviction was like iron. Margaret gasped, scandalized. "You see, you're letting a servant poison his mind." But James didn't scold his son. Instead, he looked at Evelyn, who had entered the room silently, her face composed though her hands trembled. He saw in her eyes a courage that Margaret, with all her jewels and privilege, had never possessed. That night, as James walked through the darkened halls, he found himself standing outside Evelyn's quarters. He hesitated, then knocked softly. She opened the door, surprised. He stepped inside and spoke with uncharacteristic humility. "Evelyn, tell me honestly, what do you feel about my son?" Her voice was quiet, but it carried weight. "I feel he is a child who has lost more than a child should ever lose. I feel he needs love, not the performance of it. If you're asking whether I love him as my own, then yes, I do. But I am not blind to what the world will say. They will call it wrong. They will call it shameful." James sat heavily in a chair, his head in his hands. For the first time in years, he admitted his own fear aloud. "I've spent my life protecting a name, Evelyn, a name built on power and wealth. But my son, my only son, he's asking me to choose between that name and his happiness." Evelyn looked at him, her gaze steady. "Then the question is not what society will say, sir. The question is, what will Daniel remember of you when he grows up? That you cared more for the world's judgment than for his heart." Those words echoed in James's soul long after she returned to her work. He poured himself another drink, but found no comfort in it. For the first time, he realized that his empire might crumble not from financial ruin, but from the emptiness within his own home. In the days that followed, the house seemed to split into two camps. The staff whispered with admiration for Evelyn's quiet dignity. Daniel grew more vocal in defending his choice, refusing to be swayed. And James wrestled with a decision that was no longer about appearances. It was about the future of his family, his legacy, and the truth his son had already seen. One evening, Daniel climbed onto his father's lap, something he hadn't done in months. His small hands clung to James's arm. "Dad," he whispered, "I don't want to lose another mom. Please don't make me." James's heart broke. For the first time in years, tears gathered in his eyes. He held his son close, his mind a storm of fear, love, and revelation. Somewhere deep within, he knew that Daniel's choice wasn't just childish stubbornness. It was purity, the kind of truth adults bury under pride and prejudice. But could he be brave enough to honor it? The question lingered in the silence of the Whitmore mansion, pressing heavier with each passing day. Winter descended on the city, and with it, the Whitmore mansion seemed colder than ever. Snow lay thick on the gardens, covering the fountains and statues in blankets of white. Inside, fires burned in every hearth, but they did little to ease the frost that had settled between James and the world outside. Invitations arrived for galas, charity balls, and holiday dinners, but James declined most of them. He knew what the whispers would be. He knew the questions they would ask. Still, Daniel's choice lingered like an unshakable truth. Each time James looked into his son's eyes, he saw conviction, an innocence that refused to bend beneath society's weight. And each time he saw Evelyn quietly tending to her work, he felt the burden of his own indecision pressing harder. One evening, James received an invitation he could not ignore. A holiday gathering at the estate of Henry Lancaster, a fellow magnate and one of the most powerful men in the city. Lancaster was not only an ally in business, but also a gatekeeper of James's reputation among the elite. Declining his invitation would raise questions, suspicions. Reluctantly, James agreed to attend, bringing Daniel along. The mansion glittered with lights, its halls echoing with laughter and the clinking of glasses. Women in gowns and men in tailored suits filled the air with chatter about stocks, politics, and power. Daniel, small and solemn in his suit, stayed close to his father's side. Then came the question James had dreaded. "So, James," Henry Lancaster said, swirling his wine with a smirk, "I hear your boy had quite the unusual choice for a new mother. Care to explain?" Laughter rippled through the circle of men surrounding him. Daniel's face flushed red, his small fists clenched. Before James could respond, the boy spoke with unexpected courage. "I chose Evelyn. She loves me. That's all that matters." The room fell silent for a moment, then erupted with low murmurs and muffled chuckles. Lancaster raised an eyebrow, his voice dripping with condescension. "Love? A housekeeper? My boy, love doesn't build empires. Love doesn't secure your future. Your father knows better than that." James's chest tightened as all eyes turned to him, waiting for his agreement. He opened his mouth, but for the first time in his life, words failed him. He wanted to defend his son, to silence the smug laughter, but fear chained his tongue. He placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder, guiding him away, his silence heavier than any answer. That night, back at the Whitmore mansion, Daniel locked himself in his room. James knocked gently, but the boy refused to open the door. "You didn't say anything," Daniel's muffled voice cried from the other side. "You let them laugh at her. You let them laugh at me." The words pierced James deeper than any insult ever had in boardrooms or negotiations. For the first time, he realized that his silence had betrayed his son more than any spoken word could have. Days passed, and Daniel withdrew into himself. He ate little, spoke even less, and avoided his father's gaze. Evelyn noticed immediately. She found him curled up by the window one night, his breath fogging the glass as he stared out at the falling snow. Sitting beside him, she placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Talk to me, sweetheart," she whispered. Daniel's voice trembled. "They all hate the idea of you being my mom. Even Dad didn't stand up for us. Maybe I'm wrong." Evelyn's heart broke, but her voice remained steady. "No, Daniel, you are not wrong. People will always try to tell you who you should love, who you should respect, who you should call family. But love is not theirs to decide. It is yours, and you have a braver heart than most grown men I know." The boy leaned against her, tears soaking her sleeve. For a moment, Evelyn let herself hold him like the son she had never borne. She knew this love was real, but she also knew it came at a cost society might never let them pay in peace. The breaking point came a week later. James returned from a meeting to find Evelyn in the library, her belongings packed into a small suitcase. "What are you doing?" he demanded. Her voice was calm, though her eyes shone with unshed tears. "I am leaving, Mr. Whitmore. For Daniel's sake. For yours. The boy needs love, yes, but he does not need ridicule. If my presence brings him pain in this world, then I must go." James's chest tightened with panic. "You can't just leave. He needs you." Evelyn looked at him firmly. "Then let him have me in his memories, not in his shame. Sometimes love means stepping back." At that moment, Daniel rushed in, his face pale with horror. "No, you can't leave me. You promised." He clung to Evelyn's waist, sobbing uncontrollably. The scene shattered James. He stood frozen, watching the boy's world collapse before his eyes, realizing that this was what he had been afraid of all along. Not society's judgment, Not scandal, but losing the only source of warmth his son had left. James's voice broke as he spoke, his pride stripped away. "Evelyn, please stay." Evelyn looked at him startled. "Stay? And face the scorn? Face your family's hatred? The world will not forgive this choice." James stepped closer, his voice raw but resolute. "Then let the world say what it will. I cannot raise my son in a house where love is silenced. He has chosen you, and now, so have I." For the first time in years, the walls of the Whitmore mansion seemed to tremble, not from the cold winds outside, but from the possibility of change within. The decision was made, yet the battle had only begun. The weeks that followed James's declaration were like walking through fire. Word spread quickly, as it always does in circles of wealth and power. Whispers turned into headlines, and soon newspapers carried the story with the kind of venom reserved for scandal. Millionaire defies tradition. Chooses housekeeper as son's mother. Some articles sneered, others mocked, and a few, buried deep inside, dared to call it courageous. The Whitmore mansion was besieged by judgment. Margaret, James's sister, visited once more, her face pale with fury. "You've lost your mind," she hissed. "Do you understand what this means for us? For the Whitmore legacy? Our name is already being dragged through the mud." James stood firm, his voice calm but unyielding. "The Whitmore name is meaningless if it cannot stand for truth. My son's happiness is not negotiable." Margaret's lips trembled with rage, but she knew she could not move him. She stormed out, leaving behind a silence that felt like both loss and liberation. Through it all, Evelyn remained steady. She moved about the house with quiet dignity, her head held high despite the glares from some of the staff who feared society's judgment more than they admired her courage. But Daniel blossomed. With every day that passed, the boy's laughter grew louder, his eyes brighter. For the first time since his mother's death, he looked alive. One evening, as snow fell softly against the windows, James gathered Evelyn and Daniel in the grand hall. The fire roared in the fireplace, casting golden light across the marble floors. James cleared his throat, his voice breaking slightly with emotion. "Daniel, I failed you once when I stayed silent. I will not fail you again. And Evelyn, you have given my son what no wealth, no empire, no legacy ever could. You gave him love. If you will accept, I would like you to stand in this home not as a housekeeper, but as family." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears she had long held back. She had never imagined such words would be spoken to her in this house by this man. Slowly she nodded, her voice soft but resolute. "Yes, for Daniel, yes." Daniel leapt into her arms, his joy echoing through the hall like a bell that could not be silenced. But their journey was not without resistance. Invitations to parties ceased. Business partners questioned James's judgment. Some deals crumbled under the weight of prejudice. Yet for every door that closed, another quietly opened. Letters began to arrive. Some from strangers who had read the story in the papers, parents who wrote, "Your courage gives me hope. Thank you for choosing love over pride." A few even sent gifts for Daniel, calling Evelyn the bravest mother they had ever heard of. The tide, slow but certain, began to turn. One spring afternoon, James decided to host a gathering at the mansion. Not for the elite, but for the people who worked with him, for families of his employees, for neighbors who had known Evelyn long before the world placed her name in headlines. It was a different kind of gathering, filled not with diamonds and gowns, but with music, laughter, and children running through the gardens. Daniel held Evelyn's hand proudly, introducing her to everyone as "my mom." And no one could deny the truth of it, for the bond between them shone brighter than any jewel. Later that evening, when the guests had left and the house grew quiet, James stood at the balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Evelyn joined him, her presence steady, her silence comforting. "You know," James said softly, "for years I thought strength was measured in wealth, in how many men I could command, how many buildings bore my name. But now I see, it was never about that. Strength is in choosing love when the world tells you not to. Strength is in giving my son the mother he needs, even when society disapproves." Evelyn looked at him, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "And courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing to do what is right in spite of it." James nodded slowly, realizing how much she had taught him. Not just through words, but through the quiet, steadfast way she lived. In the weeks that followed, the Whitmore name began to carry a new meaning. Yes, there were still whispers, still judgment. But there was also admiration, a slow recognition that dignity does not come from wealth alone. It comes from truth, from courage, from love. And Daniel grew into that truth. Years later, when he stood as a young man ready to inherit his father's empire, he carried with him not only the legacy of Whitmore wealth, but the deeper legacy of Evelyn's love. He spoke often of her to those who would listen, not as a housekeeper who once worked in their mansion, but as the mother who had given him back his childhood. One evening, long after James had grown old and the mansion had changed with time, Daniel stood once more in the grand hall, now filled with his own children's laughter. Evelyn, her hair streaked with silver, sat by the fire, her eyes warm as ever. Daniel's youngest daughter climbed into her lap and whispered, "Grandma, tell me the story again, about how you became my dad's mom." Evelyn smiled, her voice tender. "It wasn't a story, sweetheart. It was simply love. And love, when it is true, always finds its way." The child giggled, nestling closer. Daniel watched them from across the room, his heart full. He knew that in the end, society's whispers had faded, scandals had been forgotten, and only one truth remained: the choice of a little boy who had seen love where the world refused to look. And that choice had rewritten the meaning of family forever. If this story touched your heart, then stay with us. Like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true and deeply moving stories.